Hi guys, Blackbox here. Here's another tutorial video for you guys, and today we'll be talking about descent planning. I have been getting quite a few requests for a video about this topic, and so we'll not just talk about the autopilot usage or the different modes that are available for descent. We'll also be talking about the crude rule of thumb calculation to find a optimum top of descent. I'll demonstrate you the calculation and how to fly the descent properly, not only by using the FMS and the autopilot, but also, like I said, using a rule of thumb. We are presently en route. We've taken off from Budapest and now are on our way to Bucharest. We have just gotten the weather information from Bucharest, and it looks very much like we're gonna have a straight in approach on runway 08 right. Now, in an FMS aircraft like the A320, the FMS actually calculates the top of descent for us. However, the accuracy of this top of descent depends on the data that has been inserted into the FMS beforehand. Most important, of course, the routing towards the landing runway. If this routing is incorrect, then of course the top of descent will also be inaccurate. The same goes for the wind data. If the actual wind does not coincide with the wind that has been inserted into the FMS, then of course the descent will also be calculated incorrectly. And that's why it's so important for you to calculate top of descent yourself, and you can do that very easily by using a rule of thumb. And this rule of thumb simply states that for every 1,000 feet of height that you need to lose, you will need about 3 nautical miles of distance. And believe it or not, that coincides with a 3-degree glide path. So let's make a very simple calculation for now. So let's say we need to lose 30,000 feet of height, and therefore you will need about 90 nautical miles of distance to lose that height. That distance, of course, is a so-called still air distance, and that does not take into account any difference caused by the wind factor. Another factor you will have to take into account is the fact that you're going to have to reduce some airspeed. So let's say the managed descent speed is 290 knots. You will need to lose 90 knots until clean speed, which is around 200 knots, i.e. you're going to need another 9 miles to reduce the airspeed. So let's now calculate the required distance for our flight here. We are presently cruising at 35,000 feet, and we'll ignore the wind factor because we have only a crosswind here. So our required descent distance would be 35,000 feet divided by 1,000 multiplied by 3, which makes 105 nautical miles, and then we'll add another 9 miles to that because we're going to have to lose about 90 knots from 290 down to 200 knots. And so the grand total is 114 nautical miles of required track distance. So now let's check what the FMS has calculated. We can see the descent error on the nav display. Top of descent is 15 miles away now, and the total distance to the runway threshold is 138 miles. So the FMS calculates about 123 required track miles until the runway. Be aware that these differences do occur between the FMS and the rule of thumb, but the importance of the rule of thumb is to check if the FMS has made a plausible calculation or not. Next, I want to show you a little trick you can do in the FSLabs A320 FMS if you don't have a DME stationed at the airport, which is the case here in Bucharest. You just enter the 4-letter ICAO code of the airport, then the runway being used, so we have LROP 08 right, and enter that into the to prompt. And then you get the direct track distance to the runway threshold. And in this case, that's about 125 nautical miles. Now let's get back to our flight, and you can see the primary flight display shows decelerate, indicating that we have reached our calculated top of descent. So I've dialed in level 100, pressed the altitude knob, meaning that we're going to do a managed descent, and immediately you can see a little magenta circle appearing on the altitude scale. And that magenta circle visually indicates to you whether or not you're high or low in the calculated profile. On the descent page, you can see the value here being 340 feet high. Plus means high, minus means low. And so what the autopilot will do now, it'll increase the rate of descent in order to catch up with the vertical profile. Once it has regained that correct profile, it'll adjust the rate of descent accordingly. From now on, it is your task to make sure that the calculated FMS profile remains correct. For example, if the wind situation changes, or maybe you get a shortcut, you will quickly use the rule of thumb to cross-check the calculated descent distance. Again, don't make this into rocket science. We are trying to do a very economical descent into the destination airport, meaning we'll try to fly an idle power descent as long as possible in order to avoid flying longer distances at low altitude in level flight. Now let's have a look at the approach chart of the ILS 08 right in Bucharest. We can see that the inbound course of the localizer is 079 degrees. The initial altitude is 2,500 feet. The descent point is at 7.6 miles from the ILS, India Oscar Papa. The glide path has a 2.7 degree non-standard profile in this case. The category 1 minimum is 520 feet. The missed approach takes us first of all QDM 079 to Oscar Papa Echo, and then outbound 081 QDR to Oscar Papa Tango, and we're going to climb to 3,000 feet. The runway 08 right has 3,500 meters length, and we can see that there's Papi's left side also at 2.7 degrees profile. Alright, let's have a look how we are doing in the descent now. We have about 26,000 feet to lose, meaning that we'll require about 78 track miles plus the 9 miles for the deceleration, so 87 miles in total. And you can see that we have 88 miles remaining, and so we should be pretty much on path. Let's pretend now that air traffic control is giving us a direct to Gudiv, and that way it will shorten the approach a little bit, and you can see that immediately the FMS recalculates and has decided that we are now high in the profile, approximately 500 feet, and the autopilot will now increase the rate of descent and allow the speed to build up to the upper value or the upper limit of the range. And it'll do that until it's going to regain the profile, which is just doing now. And then of course it'll reduce the rate of descent again in order to maintain that new profile. Let us use again our rule of thumb. We have to lose 22,000 feet, meaning 66 miles track distance. Now we're at 310 knots, i.e. we have to lose 110 knots until we can configure the aircraft, and that equates to 11 miles. And so 66 plus 11 is 77 miles, and you can see the remaining distance about 78 miles, i.e. the rule of thumb also indicates that we are pretty much on profile. And this is the process that pilots go through when they are descending, always rechecking from time to time with the rule of thumb whether or not the FMS is still calculating a optimum path or not. While we're in the descent, let me explain something else here. You can see on the nav display a magenta circle and also a blue arrow. The blue arrow is simply the point, the position where the aircraft will level off at the selected FCU altitude, in this case level 100. The magenta circle indicates the position where the autopilot will initiate the automatic deceleration from the current speed to the new computed speed, in this case 250 knots, which has to be maintained below level 100. So now we're reaching the magenta circle, and there we go. The FMS now commands the new speed of 250 knots. Now we'll continue descending, going to descend to level 50 now, pressing the altitude knob to get the managed mode. And you can see the new blue arrow now indicating the point at which the aircraft will reach the flight level 50. Also passing level 100, we're going to switch on the landing lights, seatbelt signs as well, and we're going to have to program the FMS with the landing data. So we have QNH 1018, temperature is 20 degrees Celsius, and the wind is 260 at 3, a little bit of tailwind, but nothing to worry about. Also the minimum is 520 feet, and then on the RadNav we're going to select Oscar Papa Echo beacon on ADF2, and for the missed approach we're going to need Oscar Papa Tango as well. Now once below level 100 we're going to calculate the descent profile just a little bit different. We are now going to look at the final descent point. In this case it is Foxtrot 08 right, and that will be our gate. Now gate meaning that we want to be at a certain altitude with a certain configuration and speed at that point. So at Fox 08 right, we want to be at 2,500 feet and at configuration 1 at least. And so we'll have to lose 5,000 feet, meaning that'll take us about 15 miles. And then we're going to have to reduce the speed by about, let's say 60 knots. So we're adding 6 miles to that, i.e. we're going to need 21 miles to that final fix. And we can see that we have approximately 25 miles, so we're in pretty good shape at this point. Now I want to draw your attention to another symbol on the nav display. You can see a magenta circle with a magenta D delta in it, and that point indicates the deceleration point, i.e. where the aircraft will automatically activate the approach phase and initiate the automatic deceleration towards V approach. Okay, now we're descending to our initial altitude, 2,500 feet on the QNH 1018. And since we now have an ILS DME distance, 25 miles, you can see that in the lower left part of the primary flight display, we'll quickly recheck our profile. So 5,000 feet to lose, meaning 15 miles, and we're going to have to reduce the speed, well, by a good 100 knots. So we'll add another 10 miles and hence 25 miles to the threshold, which is pretty good. Now with the 100 knots deceleration, I mean the speed we're currently at down to approximately V approach, which is around 150 knots. Again, estimations, not rocket science. But nevertheless, the FMS seems to agree with us. And so right up to this point, we've pretty much done a idle power descent. Hence, it has been very economical. Now we are activating the approach. So we have autopilot 1 and 2, cut redo, lock blue, and glide slope blue. Now we have lock star. And 1000 feet to level off. Now you can see that the 2500 feet level of altitude pretty much coincides with the deceleration point, and so idle thrust will prevail right to the point where we'll configure the aircraft, I would think, to flaps 2. Now we're passing the deceleration point, and you can see that the approach phase activates automatically, and the new commanded speed is the V approach speed of 134 knots. So all we're doing now is let the aircraft gently decelerate, and then we can start configuring the aircraft. Flaps 1. Flaps 2. And glide slope is alive. So descent point is at 7.6 DME from India Oscar Papa. And now is the first time that the engines actually spool up since we have left our top of descent. Glide slope star, 7.6 DME, just about to approach that, so we have the correct cross-check DME distance here, selecting gear down. Alright, flaps are full, arming the spoilers, switching on turn off and landing lights, reading the landing checklist with ECA memo, landing no blue. Also not forgetting to select the go around altitude in this case 3000 feet. Now synchronizing the thrust levers with the present power setting, and then switching off the auto thrust, and then we'll switch off the autopilot, and we have manual flight.
1000.
1000 feet is checked.
$500. 400. 300. 100 above.
Runway is in sight.
200. Minimum.
Continue.
100. 50. 40. 30. 20. Retard. 10. 5.
Spoilers, reverse, green, and decel. And so, welcome to Bucharest Airport. Disarming the spoilers, going to retract the flaps. Also opening the flap from the APU. Switching off the landing lights, switching off the strobe lights as well. In case you're wondering who made this beautiful airport add-on, it's from LH Simulations. Alright, we're here, setting the parking brake. APU is now available, switching off the engines, switching off transponder, beacon, letting in some bleed air for the packs, and switching off the remaining lights. And that's it. Welcome once again to beautiful Bucharest. That concludes the video about descent planning. I very much hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like, and even better, subscribe. That is very much appreciated. So now it is up to you to practice your descent planning. Have fun with that, and as always, happy landings.